Hey everyone, before we get into this episode, I want to let you know about my free guidebook called Music Production Essentials. It's a brief rundown of my top 24 takeaways that I've learned over the course of interviewing so many audio professionals for this podcast. So just go to secretsonics.co and you'll see the image. It's a totally free download, and I hope it helps you with your productions. Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 106 with Justin Craig. I had a great conversation with Justin, and we talked about so many things, including his journey, coming up in Lexington, Kentucky, moving to New York, working as a musical director for Hedwig and the Angry Inch on Broadway. We talked about his approach to production, playing multiple instruments, and how that's a massive part of what he does. We also talked about his approach to mixing, how he gets massive drum sounds out of a very small recording studio space. And we talked about overcoming imposter syndrome and all the other things that come along with being a music producer these days. So with all that to say, I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Justin Craig here on Secret Sonics. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I am your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Justin Craig. Justin is a Grammy-nominated record producer and music director based in New York City. Since 2006, he has performed in 49 states and 7 countries. Former guest of the show, Dwayne Lundy, recommended I reach out to Justin, who's graciously agreed to join me on the air. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Justin.
Ben, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So just tell the audience a little bit about yourself. You know, how did music become a thing for you? And how did it become production and I guess musical directing and all the other things that you're doing?
Where to begin? It's a long story. My parents love music, so there was a lot of really good music going on in the house all the time. I guess I would say my dad is a bit of an audiophile, so he always had the highest, fiest equipment and speakers and great sounding audio equipment. And looking back, that probably got me going and really interested in just sound and sonics and everything. I mean, outside the music, of course, I'm hearing the Beatles and it's blowing my mind as a kid.
Yeah.
And other things like prog rock and just the classic stuff. So, you know, I wanted to play guitar from an early age. And I think my parents got me one when I was 12. And I just started teaching myself from the Beatles chord book and Mel Bay scales and stuff like that. But yeah, mostly self-taught. My dad could play some chords and help me strum along, so that was helpful. And then from there, you know, getting into high school and falling in love with, you know, just The Cure, Radiohead, some more grungy stuff in the 90s.
That's my jam also.
Yeah, and Tom Petty was huge for me when I was that age. Mike Campbell still to this day is like my favorite lead guitar player. Maybe a close second to George Harrison. But so I'm listening to all this music and I'm starting to play in bands and just find my way. So that was kind of it. When I was like 17, you interviewed Dwayne Lundy back a few episodes back on your podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when I was like 17 or 18, he produced my band. I was in high school and he was kind of, I guess at the time he was a few years in to his production stuff and he had a studio at his house. And anyways, we had this great time and I think he must have seen something in me or we just had like a great recording experience. And eventually he started calling me back in for like session work as a guitarist or, you know, maybe hitting a drum or something like that. And eventually his studio moved to a different spot. He got this huge space and was getting all these artists coming through, just a ton of different people coming through to work with him. And he was calling me up to be on the sessions as a multi-instrumentalist. And eventually, like, he kind of sat me down and was like, you know, I think you're a producer, or in so many words, something like that. And so he really helped me out. He was a big mentor figure in my life. And just
that's amazing that he proactively mentored you. Like, you know, you didn't even ask for it. He's just like, hey, You
Yeah.
did good with the guitar. Why don't you come over and help me out with the set? It just like brought you into the fold.
Well, I was always interested in records and how they were put together, and just listening to, like I said, my dad's music and George Martin. Like, what's going on there? Like, trying to unpack all the layers of those Beatles records, and like Jeff Lynne's work, where he's, just so many layers of sound, and it's crazy. And I was always just super fascinated by that and how you can create these little universes on record. And so,
yeah,
all those sessions and years spent working with Dwayne, we were experimenting and figuring out how to do that stuff. And just like, it was a really exploratory time. And I look back really fondly on that, because I realized that just like playing guitar, I'm more self-taught, and I never really took lessons or went to school. With the recording stuff and the producing, it was really learning by doing. And I did have help, obviously, Dwayne guiding a lot of that experience. But we were kind of just doing it. Like, I think audio school and recording school is amazing. And I probably have a lot to learn technically that I don't know. But there's something too about like not having some of that knowledge.
Yeah.
And you're just in the trenches and you're making a record with someone, and the artist is sitting there, like, you just have to figure it out. And it's kind of,
I love that.
It's a fun way to.
It's some of like my favorite songwriters like don't know any music theory, right? Like,
right.
Like, does Paul McCartney know much, music theory? Maybe by now he does.
No,
but
I think he still doesn't. I was just watching.
Yeah.
He's got this.
Oh my God,
the Rick Rubin thing, and I think
I'm in the middle of it.
Yeah. He's just.
I actually had to get a VPN and sign up for a
God.
free month of Hulu to watch it.
It's fun. It's
I couldn't hold back.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. Not knowing the rules sometimes helps you break them, or
Yeah.
or there's something. There was a guest on my show named Layla Mohemani who was talking about, like, if you're still a novice, or there's like a naivety to the way you produce, there could be something novel there that's interesting to people who wouldn't think that way, because they have like a set, these are the rules, this is how you do it, and you could really exploit that, I think.
Yeah.
Also as a producer.
Yeah, and you're just coming at it from it could be like a more artistic way of thinking. You're like, in my mind, I hear this sound. How do we get that sound? It's not It's not happening yet. And then you're like, all right, pulling your hair out, trying to get something to sound a certain way or feel a certain way. It's kind of trial by fire, and I kind of like working that way, honestly. Like, still like maintaining a little bit of that naive mindset, and just coming at something from like, let's discover this thing together collaboratively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure you did have to get on the YouTube University train at some point. And,
oh my God.
And obviously Dwayne, I'm sure, gave you a lot of, resources himself, right?
Oh yeah.
Like,
Dwayne's a genius. He's an amazing producer. And just in the studio, he's just a great spirit. I can't say enough about Dwayne. But yeah, when we were doing that, and when I was starting out, it was kind of pre-YouTube era, and like, I didn't have a computer, I didn't have a laptop. Like, I wasn't, I was still on like using a cassette 4-track at home, and like even like one of those CDR burning multi-tracks from like Korg or something, which I love. I love all those old gadgets, because it's almost like working on a tape deck, or like the old analog way of thinking, just learning how to layer sounds that way. But yeah, of course, even now I'm on YouTube, like checking out people's techniques, listening to Mix with the Masters interviews. I mean, all that stuff is such a great resource, and I definitely use it now. And I would have used it then, but it was kind of fun not having that in a way at the time. I mean, some of it existed, obviously, but I don't really remember leaning on it all that much.
Yeah. My memory of the early days of me getting started, which I imagine was like maybe a few years after you, was still like the Gear Sluts era.
Yeah.
And, I'm like looking to buy my first mic, and I go on Gear Sluts, and all I feel is like, oh man, they make you feel like a noob, and that wasn't fun.
No,
not fun times.
That's not fun at all.
Yeah.
You kind of have to, I personally kind of have to steer clear of those forums, because there's going to be one person that says something super insightful and helpful, and they lay out they bear their knowledge, to the world, and that's awesome. And then there's 100 comments of people saying that they're doing it wrong or they don't know what they're talking about. It's it feels a little toxic sometimes, but not to say, that's not like a generalization or across the board.
The internet is clearly a vehicle of good and bad, and it's just about how you use it.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's hard as a user of the internet to discern sometimes.
Yeah.
Anyways, so I wanted to ask you, so at some point you moved to Brooklyn and you're involved in Broadway shows.
Yeah.
And like musical directing. Like, tell me a bit about that transition moving, I guess, from Lexington to Brooklyn.
Yeah, well, how did that happen? Let's see. I was touring a lot with a band called These United States and making records with them. I mean, we were touring a lot. It was kind of nuts. But through that, I did meet my wife, Lavinia Jones-Wright. She's an amazing creator and artist, actor, filmmaker. We met through like mutual friends in bands, and she was playing with a band called Adam Arkaraji. She was working at ASCAP. She was really involved in music in New York. She was a journalist. She was writing about bands and going to see bands. And so we met through that and through friends. And eventually I started spending my time in between tours here in New York instead of going back to Kentucky or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it stuck. And then I left that band and was here permanently. And let's see, another huge figure, mentor and dear friend of mine named Stephen Trask, who wrote the songs for Hedwig and The Angry Inch, which is a massive, amazing thing. He's also a film composer, just another genius person in my life. He recommended me for a job because he knew I wanted to be in New York, and he was trying to help me out. He recommended me for a job playing in a Broadway pit.
Yeah.
And that worked out, and I started playing this gig. I was in New York. I had a job. I was feeling really great. And I was actually learning a lot about that world too, like the theater world, which was completely new to me. But I kind of fit right in, and it all went really, really well, and I made a bunch of friends. And then shortly after that, his show, Hedwig and the Angry Inch, was going up to Broadway as a revival of sorts, because, it was an off-Broadway show, like back in the 90s. But it was going...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's how it started.
I didn't know that.
And then it was
I remember
film.
from when the movie came out.
Right,
yeah.
right. Yeah, before the film, it was off Broadway.
Sure. As a native New Yorker, I know about those venues and stuff.
Downtown
totally.
at the Jane Street Theater. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah. My sister's actually an actress and her husband are actors in New York, and they're
cool.
They're in that zone.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So that show's going back to Broadway, and I had been working with Stephen for years. Another great, like I was saying, another great sort of mentorship experience was working with Stephen on film scores, and I even got to mix a couple of them. So we had this relationship of working on music together, and I think he really trusted me, and he asked me, "Will you music direct my show when it goes to Broadway?" And I was like, "Yeah, hell yeah!" So I was super excited about it, and it was an amazing experience. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life working on that show.
Wow, so crazy! How long did that run?
We did about 1.5 years on Broadway, and then there was a tour about 1 year later, and that it went all over for about 1 year, something like that.
Wow, that's so wild.
Yeah.
So I assume you're expecting this question, but like, now that you're mostly back in the production game and having done this musical directing, what would be your big takeaway from directing the music of a play into the production world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess with me, everything that I do, I come at it as a musician, like first, because that's where I feel comfortable, and that's where I feel at home. Just trying to infuse my musicality and my language into what I'm working on. And I want to say that like music directing and producing are entirely different jobs. And in some ways they are, but in some ways they kind of require very similar skill sets, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What would be those skill sets if you were to point them out,
Well,